Leona Helmsley's sentence: 4 years hard time, $7 million fine. Oliver North testimony: the judge says pretty far-fetched. And the U.S. military budget may be half as big in a decade. This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Judgment Day today for one of the world's best-known women. Leona Helmsley, the billionaire real estate owner from New York, who once was quoted as saying, "Only the little people pay taxes." Tonight, she faces hard time, prison time. Her trial this summer attracted worldwide attention with its account of lavish living and tax avoidance. This afternoon, the 69-year-old woman wept as the judge handed down her sentence for evading more than $1 million in taxes. Richard Roth reports.
The judge said she had become a lightning rod for public vilification, and that was clear outside as Leona Helmsley left the court to a chorus of jeers. Her sentence, 4 years in prison and more than $7 million in fines, was stayed pending an appeal. Sobbing in court, Helmsley called it a nightmare. "I'm more humiliated and ashamed than anyone can imagine," she said. But Judge John Walker was unmoved. "You were not driven by need," he said, "but by naked greed. You believed you were above the law." He rejected pleas that she be sentenced just to community service, telling her a substantial prison term is required. Leona Helmsley's own publicity described her as a queen, the imperial overseer of a hotel empire owned jointly with her husband Harry. The government's charge, proved in court, was that their lavish lifestyle was financed in part by tax cheating, what the judge called a sophisticated scheme of writing off even small personal expenses to their business. And you, he told her in court, were at the apex of that scheme. She was also at the height of high living in homes that included an Arizona retreat where she had spent time after her conviction and where employees described her as a penny-pinching tyrant. "We don't pay taxes," she once told a servant, "only the little people do." The image became as indelible as the regal aura created by her publicists. The judge today said none of that mattered. There's no place for it in court. He said he was punishing Leona Helmsley not for her controversy, but for her crime. And he added the sentence should be read as a simple message that no one is above the law, Dan, and that if you're caught as a tax cheat, you'll go to jail.
Richard, you were in the courtroom. How was that message received?
It was a stunner. The courtroom was jammed and absolutely silent, and to many of us it seemed at first as if the judge was telegraphing his intention to be lenient. He wasn't, of course, and when the sentence was pronounced, Leona Helmsley's shoulders seemed to drop about a foot.
There's a question of mercy and fairness here, and obviously Leona Helmsley can afford any kind of appeals. What are the chances that this won't stand up on appeal?
Well, I would bet eventually that she will go to jail, that it will stand up on appeal for two reasons. One is that most experts say there isn't that much in the trial record that's controversial enough to seem to warrant a reversal on the basis of the record. And the second point is that the judge pointed out in his sentencing that the sentence he delivered today is within federal guidelines for this type of crime.
Richard Roth, thanks. Secretary of State James Baker made a visit to East Germany today. He met with the new communist premier at Potsdam, near East Berlin. That's the place where the fate of post-war defeated Germany was decreed in 1945 by the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union. CBS News State Department correspondent Bill Plant covered today's Potsdam conference.
Secretary of State Baker crossed into East Germany on an unscheduled rescue mission for its communist prime minister. The aim, prop up Hans Modrow's now all but invisible government so it doesn't fall before elections scheduled in May. The message, keep things peaceful and stable.
And it is that, as much as anything else, that represents the political signal that we desired to send by being here today.
Then, hedging his bets, Baker took that same message across the street to a group of opposition political leaders gathered at a church. But here, the same signal had a different spin. The U.S. actively encourages the reformers. Officials say both groups agreed that the headlong rush of support in East Germany for reunification is driven by people's desire for a better standard of living. While promising no U.S. aid to East Germany, Baker did say that if elections are held as promised, the West would likely come forward with the kind of help it has promised Poland and Hungary. Earlier in West Berlin, Baker toured the wall at Potsdamer Platz, gazing east through a convenient hole. But even if the wall is now mainly symbolic, Baker counseled caution on reunification.
This very positive course will not be easy, nor can it be rushed. It must be peaceful, it must be democratic, and of course it must respect the legitimate concerns of all of the participants in the new Europe.
Baker's message to both East and West was that for the U.S., stability is the most important concern. Administration officials are deeply worried that events could spin out of control. But that's not all that worries them. Almost as bad from the administration's point of view would be for the U.S. to be left behind as Eastern Europe remakes itself. Bill Plant, CBS News, Potsdam.
Among other things, Secretary Baker's trip today again underscores the hope and fear in Europe of a reunified Germany, the day-to-day breakups in the communist bloc, and budget realities here at home. All of this figures into the current rethinking of U.S. defense strategy and military spending. Some of that rethinking is underway in the U.S. Congress now, and it isn't necessarily in line with President Bush's thinking. CBS News Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer has the latest. Bob?
Dan, the big changes across Eastern Europe have already prompted a big push to cut defense spending here, and today there were indications Congress may try to cut much deeper than the administration wants. As the Senate Budget Committee opened hearings today, there was dramatic testimony from one of the early architects of Ronald Reagan's military buildup over what may now be possible.
If the world goes as it has been in the last year, by the year 2000, we can have a defense budget in real terms about half of what we are now.
And a former Pentagon chief said Gorbachev has given the West a real chance to break the bad habits of the past.
We, the U.S. and the West, have consistently exaggerated Soviet and Warsaw Pact strength and underestimated NATO.
As if to underline that, angry Democrats on the Armed Services Committee charged at another hearing that when the Bush administration presented the Pentagon budget request to Congress this year, it failed to reveal new intelligence estimates showing the Soviet threat to Europe was diminishing.
So I'm asking you now, if we've got this kind of performance based on the last 12 months, what can we expect with the changes that have taken place in the next few months?
Is the budget we're going to get in January, is it going to reflect all the events of the last 3 months?
The kinds of events that we've seen in Eastern Europe, while they're dramatic and in the long term they may be significant, I think are a little too quick to factor them immediately into a defense posture and start regulating your defense posture on that basis.
To be sure, the fight over defense here will be fierce, but the one expected inside the Pentagon may be even fiercer. Defense Secretary Cheney has already told the services to find ways to scale back. But redesigning the military to deal with the new reality could mean that some branches of the service will have to take greater cuts than others. And as Budget Committee Chairman Jim Sasser was saying today, when that happens, things could really get nasty. Dan?
Thanks, Bob. The Soviet parliament today defeated a move to debate the Communist Party's constitutional monopoly on power, but the vote was close. More than 800 out of 2,000 deputies voted in favor of the revolutionary move proposed by poet Yevgeny Yevtushenko. Mikhail Gorbachev led those opposed, and he prevailed on the Congress to stick to economic issues in its 10-day winter meeting. Now, still to come on your CBS Evening News, Deborah Potter on degradable plastic from fast food places that isn't all it seems, and Bob McNamara on a long-running cold climate controversy. The presidents of 5 Central American countries today called for rebels to quit fighting in El Salvador and for the U.S.-backed Nicaraguan Contras to disband. The 5 presidents ended a stormy summit meeting with an agreement that supported both the right-wing Salvadoran government and the Marxist-led Sandinista regime in Nicaragua. The Moscow and Havana-backed Salvadoran rebels angrily rejected the truce call, saying it gave unconditional backing to what they see as the region's main violator of human rights. The United States expressed reservations about the call to break up the Contras. A spokesman for President Bush said demobilization must be accompanied by democratic changes inside Nicaragua. Oliver North was back in federal court in Washington today, this time as a witness in pretrial hearings for the highest-ranking defendant in the criminal case growing out of the secret missiles for Iran deal. CBS News law correspondent Rita Braver was in the courtroom.
Oliver North today tried to persuade a federal judge not to force him to testify against his good friend and one-time boss, former National Security Advisor John Poindexter. Poindexter is set to stand trial next month for lying and obstructing Congress during the Iran-Contra affair. And because his testimony on Capitol Hill was given under a grant of immunity, it cannot be used against him at trial. North claimed he would be a tainted witness because he cannot separate Poindexter's congressional testimony from what I knew in my own mind. He said he'd watched videotapes of Poindexter's testimony over and over as he prepared for his own trial. And North likened his memory of events to a football game, where you can't tell if what you remember is what you've seen or from seeing 3 instant replays. Judge Harold Green minced no words, pointing out that this witness does not desire to testify against Poindexter, and one of the ways he can do it is to bring out that his testimony is tainted by knowledge of what Poindexter said to Congress. For 6 hours, prosecutor Dan Webb tried to get North to admit that his knowledge of Poindexter's Iran-Contra activities was independent of Poindexter's congressional testimony. North bobbed and weaved through it all, claiming that he now can't remember things he previously testified about involving wrongdoing by Poindexter. Finally, a skeptical Judge Green called North's alleged confusion pretty far-fetched. North has more at stake than his desire to protect Poindexter. North claims that his own trial was prejudiced by witnesses who heard his Capitol Hill testimony, and he is appealing his conviction on that ground. Rita Braver, CBS News, Washington.
The people who are supposed to govern big-time college sports penalized a sometime basketball powerhouse today. Serious charges had been raised about the program at North Carolina State University. Some sports writers and others say today's ruling left a lot of hard questions unanswered about big-money college sports in this country. Bruce Hall has our report.
That's a long ways.
Jim Valvano was at the top of the college basketball world, one of the most popular and powerful figures in the game, who led his North Carolina State team to a national championship 6 years ago.
Here we go, here we go, here we go.
Today, the NCAA placed North Carolina State on 2 years probation, barring it from 1990 postseason play, because players have been selling and trading complimentary game tickets and school-issued basketball shoes.
The committee noted that the university failed to control its intercollegiate athletics program.
There's no basis for an appeal, and we accept the NCAA findings and its punishment.
Valvano was forced to give up his athletic director's post earlier this fall after a controversial book alleged grade fixing by administrators and drug use by players. The charges were never proven, but the author claims the team symbolizes corruption in big-time college sports.
The NCAA is going to have to decide whether they want professionals out there on the court or whether they want college kids. It's as simple as that.
Over the past year, there have been charges Valvano's program is riddled with corruption, and that 2/3 of the players he recruited have either been suspended or placed on academic probation.
Play with emotion, play with emotion.
But there was never any doubt that the flamboyant coach knew how to inspire his players and win games. Now, North Carolina State officials are instituting their own reforms, trying to regain control of the program by placing tighter controls over tickets, severely curtailing recruiting, reducing basketball scholarships, and reviewing the entire men's program in Jim Valvano's contract at the end of the school year. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Atlanta.
In Guadalajara today, one of Mexico's leading drug thugs, Rafael Caro Quintero, was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the 1985 murder of U.S. Drug Enforcement agent Enrique Camarena. Camarena had been working undercover in Mexico when he was kidnapped, tortured, then killed.
Recently, a serious topic has come up at breakfast, oat bran. But that doesn't mean you have to be so serious, because with Kellogg's Common Sense Oat Bran Waffles from Eggo, oat bran's never been so enjoyable. Seriously.
Mr. Kayam, I hate shaving. Doug, try this Remington microscreen. It shaves as close as a blade, or your money back.
Is it a product used a lot by fast food places and marketed as a new way to cut down America's garbage problem? May be more of an advertising success than an environmental one. CBS News correspondent Deborah Potter reports on the degradable plastic problem. It won't go away.
It sounds like such a great idea. Add some cornstarch to plastic and presto, it's biodegradable.
Isn't it funny how a little bit of good news can make the bad news just disappear?
The new plastic is popping up in everything, from disposable diapers to grocery bags, all touted as safe for the environment. And consumers concerned about the garbage glut are snapping it up.
We've got to try something. We're going to be buried by the stuff if we don't.
If you've got an answer to clearing it up, it'll be wonderful. If not for me, for my grandchildren.
But degradable plastics came under attack today from an unexpected source. A coalition of environmental groups said they're no solution and called for a consumer boycott.
We're saying, don't get glad, get mad.
Degradable plastics are the ultimate consumer ripoff. They may produce profits, but they do not provide environmental protection.
In fact, scientists say that in landfills sealed off from sunlight, so-called degradable plastics last just as long as any other kind. Out in the open, when they do fall apart, they may cause more harm than good.
Do the chemicals that go into the plastics, lead and cadmium, become more available? Are there problems created by the release of those chemicals?
Plastics manufacturers admit the degradable product is no cure-all, but they say it's what the public wants.
It's the activist, the environmental activist, who has said that plastic should be degradable until very recently. And so they have created this demand, and we have had to respond to that demand by offering a product that is degradable.
Environmental groups say the worst thing about degradable plastics is that they give consumers false hope, allowing them to believe they're doing the right thing while ignoring what even manufacturers agree is the real solution, recycling. Deborah Potter, CBS News, Washington.
A judge in Anchorage, Alaska today refused to dismiss criminal charges against Joseph Hazelwood, captain of the Exxon Corporation supertanker Valdez, when it was involved in this nation's worst oil spill last March. Hazelwood's lawyers argued that he was immune from prosecution because laws protect people who report oil spills. But the judge said the spill would have been discovered within minutes anyway. Facing a worldwide storm of protest, the British government today suspended its new program of forcibly returning Vietnamese boat people from Hong Kong back to Vietnam. Prime Minister Thatcher insisted the halt is only temporary. The United States had joined in criticizing the program, but one British official said Americans do the same thing to illegal immigrants every day. Correspondent Bill Whitaker is covering the story in Hong Kong.
The move to delay the repatriation is not likely to relieve the desperate situation in Hong Kong's refugee camps. The colony has been overwhelmed. 56,000 Vietnamese refugees now crowd squalid camps where food and shelter are inadequate and disease rampant. 34,000 came just this year, most of them poor farmers and fishermen. Despair and misery have bred violence. And so last night, 51 of the boat people were moved under the cover of darkness, hustled out of a Hong Kong refugee camp by armed guards. They are the first of more than 40,000 the British colony intends to send back to Vietnam. Officials here deny the Vietnamese are being forced out. Their cries tell a different story. The forced repatriation brought swift international condemnation.
We believe that British authorities should continue to grant asylum to all those persons from Vietnam who seek it.
This was a situation of potential grave human rights abuse, a serious violation of international refugee law.
Even as her administration announced a one-week suspension, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher defended the policy.
It is perfectly in order to return them, and those countries who are protesting at their return would do far better if they offered to take some of them.
With tens of thousands of boat people in camps throughout the region, human rights groups now fear a mass reverse flow of refugees as other Southeast Asian nations take a cue from Hong Kong and send the Vietnamese back home. Bill Whitaker, CBS News, Hong Kong.
Of an upright in the palm of your hand. With the Royal Dirt Devil, it has a revolving brush, and it can handle all kinds of dirt. Pick up the handheld vac that really picks up. Dirt Devil by Royal.
When you've got hemorrhoids, walking is hard. Sitting is worse.
Anusol ointment has an anesthetic for the pain and itch. Does your brand? Anusol ointment has an anesthetic to take the hurt out of hemorrhoids.
Through the centuries, people have dressed themselves in fur or in clothes trimmed with fur. But these days, that once accepted custom is under attack. Just last month, thousands marched in so-called Fur-Free Friday protests in 90 communities all across the country. And now furriers in a high-visibility resort face a vote they say could leave them out in the cold. Bob McNamara reports.
In Dallas, the opera brings patrons swaddled in the luxury of fur.
It's warm and it's nice and I love it.
And in New York's raw cold, furs of all kinds cloak shoppers and strollers. But what once was a symbol of envy is more and more being cast as evil.
No more furs! No more furs!
In Denver as elsewhere recently, animal rights advocates picketed fashionable fur stores. Even less subtle are billboards. Tactics the fur industry warns are the start of future protests.
It's going to be fur, it's going to be leather. They're against the use of wool, silk, duck down.
Today, fur sales have suffered because of the protests. And trying to shore up its high-end billion-dollar-a-year bottom line, the fur industry is waging a freedom of choice and customer reassurance campaign.
We are a committed industry, committed to responsible treatment of animals.
But no place is the issue magnified more than in Aspen, Colorado, the glitzy resort where Hollywood goes downhill. Here, where rich is as practiced as a pose or as casual as tennies below $10,000 coats, voters will decide in 2 months whether to ban the sale of furs. The ban, a crusade of Aspen's mayor, accused by many of publicity seeking.
It's anything but a personal agenda. First of all, these animals are not voters. Secondly, someone I think has to speak for the animals.
If you show me a woman who's wearing a fur coat, I'll show you a woman who's an animal lover.
Aspen furrier Mark Kirkland says a fur ban would ruin Aspen's business, that the city wants to legislate morality.
It's not a fur issue. It's a freedom of choice issue.
I mean, the issue is cruelty to animals. And if they can say that their business has nothing to do with cruelty to animals, I'd like to hear that argument.
On Aspen cable television, graphic anti-fur films have charged issue emotions. And on the streets, a pro-fur movement wants the mayor recalled.
This isn't a matter for city government. This is ridiculous.
The wearing of furs would not be banned, only fur sales. But somewhere between the hot anger and cold contempt over the issue are the tourists.
Would it keep me from returning? No, it wouldn't keep me from returning, but I wouldn't like it.
In a town that thrives on letting the rich be rich, furriers and other businesses argue this is the last place to take the lead against big-time spenders. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Aspen, Colorado.
And that's part of our world tonight. Dan Rather for the CBS Evening News. See you tomorrow. Good night.
I'm Harry Smith.
And I'm Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, football great Walter Payton.
Also, Ed Begley Jr. This week, Kathleen Turner on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
Just ahead on 11 News at 6, a House